Time to start talking a lot. Over and over, Genshin Impact has shown how readily it can adapt its rather simple framework to a staggering variety of stories. From its high-stakes, world-in-the-balance plot lines like Osial's vendetta against the Geo Archon, which threatens all of Liyue Harbor, all the way to beautiful interpersonal and intra-community tales like those of Mondstadt's fraternal Windbloom Festival or Liyue's sentimental Lantern Rite. Now, I've taken a long break from Genshin Impact just for no particular reason, but I got back into it and I'm catching up, and I'll tell you what I did not expect getting back into it is a pretty stellar cyberpunk psychological thriller that you find when you arrive in the capital city of the nation of Sumeru. Nor did I expect it to be one of my favorite stories in the game so far. Let's lay the groundwork. This is Sumeru, the nation of the Dendro element. This element has to do with plant life. Its god is the Dendro Archon, named Lesser Lord Kusanali. Lesser Lord Kusanali took over Archon duties after the beloved and still highly popular previous Dendro Archon, named Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, died. But Lesser Lord Kusanali hasn't been seen much. She is perceived to not be around and not be very active in their lives. Since the current Dendro Archon is perceived as absentee or inactive, the sages of the Academia, basically a university complex, act as the ruling class of Sumeru. That these scholars are elevated to the level of rulers and educators reveal the cultural weight scholarly credentials play in Sumeru. That these scholars are elevated to the level of rulers and educators reveals the cultural weight that scholarly credentials carry in Sumeru, the so-called Nation of Wisdom. Upon arriving in the capital, every citizen and visitor is given an Akasha terminal, a high-tech Google Glass-like AR device that also interfaces directly with your brain, allowing instantaneous access to all known information. However, something is immediately awry since there are some questions that the Akasha terminal seems to have no answer for. You see, the Traveler and Paimon want to speak to the Dendro Archon immediately, but the Akasha terminal comes up snake eyes. The suspicions are immediately apparent, since now we can see that the information appears to be controlled. The obvious suspect is the Academia, as the rulers of the nation and arbiters of information. This is true, but fortunately this has created a black market of information for folks like Dory, the crime boss and dark web merchant of verboten cognitive goods. Unfortunately, these don't turn up any information about the Dendro Archon's whereabouts. As the Traveler and Paimon continue to ask around, they befriend a sweet and kind-hearted young lady named Dunyarzad and her faithful mercenary bodyguard, Dia. Dunyarzad is afflicted with a terminal illness, but as one of the few devoted followers of Lesser Lord Kusanali, she's still determined to throw a successful Sabzerus festival. This once raucous, now poorly attended and nearly forgotten birthday celebration for Lesser Lord Kusanali becomes the greatest motivation for Dunyarzad. The festival is tragically cut short as the Grand Sage stops the festival right before its climactic moment, a traditional dance of flowers performed by Dunyarzad's best friend, Nilu. The whole crew feel horrible for Dunyarzad and Nilu, who work so hard on the festival despite Dunyarzad's illness. Upon rising the next morning, everything seems familiar. Yep, it's a Groundhog Day time loop. At least that's what it looks like. The Traveler isn't totally wise to it, but she feels a strong sense of deja vu that apparently nobody else feels. You repeat the cycle a couple of times, and each consecutive time, Dunyarzad seems more tired and disconnected. Eventually, you meet Nahida, the only person who understands what's going on. However, she can't just tell you. In order to break the cycle, you have to figure out what's going on yourself. She gives some helpful hints, though. I'll set the rest of the details aside, but in broad strokes, you learn that this is not a time loop, but instead, the academia is using the Akasha terminals to erase everyone's memories of the previous day. This naturally, seemingly to me, would have catastrophic effects on the economy of Sumeru, but also on its citizens. Everyone's head feels more and more heavy and tired. More and more people are being replaced by simulations or puppets, including Dunyarzad, whose real self very nearly dies from her untreated illness over the course of many disappearing days. The actual mechanics of how this all is supposed to work is fuzzy to me, so if any of you have a firmer theory or a better grasp of it, feel free to share in the comments. But the basic notion of the whole narrative is something that moved me profoundly. The Akasha Terminal is a very obvious analogy to our constant connection to the internet, whether via smartphones or the breathless quest for portable, lightweight AR glasses. Their utility is a blessing, but their access to all known information is a curse. The use of the Akasha Terminals isn't so much painted in a negative light in and of itself, but the fact that the academia, which pursues scholarly matters as well as governance, would monopolistically develop, manufacture, and distribute Akasha terminals, which give them the ability to hijack users' brains, is such a good analogy of the modern tech company business model, one which espouses as much control as possible over its user and harvesting as much time and attention as possible from them. Have you ever used your phone too much? As soon as I got a smartphone, I began emulating classic games on it. I played through both Game Boy Advance Fire Emblem games in about a month. I loved them, but I was miserable and exhausted a lot of the time, just from the sheer amount of time I was looking down at my screen. I can guarantee you that if I was spending that time on much less productive tasks that the powers that be at the internet would have wanted me to spend time on, like using social media, I would have felt much worse. That the academia, performing such a high-powered function as erasing memories with the Akasha terminals, would result in heaviness of head and unusual exhaustion in its users, to me is an adequate analogy of this phenomenon. There are many more things about this story that were great. The details with Dia, how smart Dia is when she begins to realize what's happening. Of course, every cycle she forgets, but she catches on quick because she's so smart. The emotional weight that is given to Dunyarzad's plight and how close we come to losing her and how effective that was emotionally, and how the game began to, and how this quest began to make you dislike and distrust the academia and the sages at the academia. What the academia does here is diabolical. The Vision Hunt decree by Raiden Shogun was pretty messed up. But similarly dastardly to that is what the academia did with the citizens of Sumeru City and with their Akasha terminals and with their minds. And the fact that they're capable of that and willing to do that was surprising, and I look forward to further information being revealed along these lines in Sumeru City. So I hope you'll excuse me as I end on perhaps a somewhat odd note, but just remember that all the incentives in our world reinforce the behavior of staying online, of staying on our phones, of staying on social media. I like this story in Genshin Impact. It is one that demonstrates adequately the concerns we ought to have about technology. I'm not trying to be a Luddite in the more common but incorrect sense of the word Luddite. I'm not trying to be that way. I would just perhaps invite you to evaluate. If you're watching this, you're into video games. You might like Genshin Impact. You might hate Genshin Impact, but you might like games. And that's amazing. Games are incredible. We just, I think, could benefit from the occasional breath of fresh air, the occasional connection with another person. So, thank you so much for checking out this video, though. Probably on your smartphone, or probably while you're by yourself. Look, I understand. It's just a simple invitation to, we can have it all. We really can have it all. I hope that someday we can.